You know, I've lived in plenty of neighborhoods over the years, but nothing prepared me for what I witnessed in Willow Creek. This is the kind of story that sounds too crazy to be true, but I promise you, every word of what I'm about to tell you actually happened. And by the end, you'll understand why our local HOA president went from power-hungry Karen to county jail inmate in less than 2 hours. Let me paint you a picture of Willow Creek. It's one of those picture-perfect suburban developments where every lawn looks like it belongs in a magazine. The mailboxes are all regulation black, and God help you if your Christmas lights are still up on January 2nd. At the heart of this manicured paradise was Karen Whitmore, our HOA president and self-appointed neighborhood dictator. Karen wasn't just your average busybody neighbor. She was something else entirely. This woman carried a measuring tape in her purse, I'm not kidding, and would actually measure the height of your fence posts if she suspected. They were half an inch too tall. She had memorized every single HOA bylaw and could quote violation codes like scripture. Some people found her dedication admirable. Most of us found her absolutely terrifying. But Karen's reign of terror was about to come to a spectacular end, thanks to one man's tomato plants. Jim Bennett was the kind of neighbor everyone liked. Quiet, polite, kept to himself mostly. He'd lost his wife about 3 years ago, and we'd all watched him slowly come back to life. Part of that healing involved planting a small vegetable garden in his front yard. Nothing fancy, just some tomato plants, a few herbs, maybe some peppers. It was actually really nice to see him engaged in something again. That's when Karen struck. She marched up to Jim's door on a Tuesday morning, clipboard in hand like she was conducting a military inspection. The garden, she declared, was a clear violation of Section 4.2 of the Landscaping Ordinance. Vegetables belonged in backyards, not front yards. It was unsightly, unhygienic, and, her favorite phrase, detrimental to property values. Jim, being the reasonable person he was, politely disagreed. He'd read the HOA guidelines thoroughly before planting, and nowhere did it specifically prohibit vegetables in front yards. The landscaping rules mentioned appropriate plantings and maintained appearance, both of which his neat little garden clearly met. But Karen wasn't interested in reasonable discussions. When Jim refused to remove his garden, she escalated with the fury of a woman who'd never been told no in her entire HOA career. What happened next was like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Karen launched a full legal assault through the HOA. Daily violation notices appeared on Jim's door. Fine letters followed. Then came the big guns, a notice of intent to place a lien on his property if he didn't comply within 30 days. Here's what Karen didn't know about quiet. Polite Jim Bennett. He was a retired civil attorney with 40 years of courtroom experience. The man knew law like Karen knew HOA bylaws, and something about this whole situation was starting to smell fishy. Jim did what any good lawyer would do. He requested copies of all documentation the HOA had filed regarding his case. What he found in that stack of papers made his blood run cold. There, on multiple forms, was his signature agreeing to the initial penalties and acknowledging the violations. The problem? Jim had never signed a single document. He'd never agreed to anything. Someone had forged his signature, and he had a pretty good idea who. But Jim didn't confront Karen. He had a much better plan. Jim quietly took the documents to a handwriting expert and a notary he'd worked with for decades. The analysis was crystal clear. The signatures were fake and poorly done at that. Someone had traced over a signature from another document. But the pressure points and letter formations were all wrong. Instead of raising hell at the next HOA meeting, Jim filed a motion with the district court requesting judicial review of the forged documents. He compiled everything, the fake signatures, the originals, handwriting analysis, timestamps, email trails, the works. This wasn't going to be a he said, she said situation. Meanwhile, Karen continued her neighborhood patrol like nothing had happened. She cited 3 families for having their garbage cans visible from the street for more. Then 6 hours after pickup, she measured someone's lawn ornament and found it 2 inches too tall. She was in her element, completely oblivious to the legal storm brewing. The court summons arrived at Karen's house on a Friday afternoon. I happened to be walking my dog when the process server showed up, and I'll never forget the look on her face when she signed for those papers. Confusion, then irritation, then that familiar Karen smugness. She probably thought it was just another formality, another chance to flex her authority in front of a judge. She had no idea she was walking into a courtroom with Judge Evelyn Moore, who had a reputation for eating lawyers alive. When they tried to play games with her court, the hearing was scheduled for the following Tuesday at 2 p.m. Word spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. This wasn't just about Jim's tomato plants anymore. This was David versus Goliath, and Goliath was about to get a very rude awakening. Karen showed up to court like she was attending a board meeting. Power suit, briefcase, 2 HOA board members trailing behind her like nervous assistants. She strutted into that courtroom with the confidence of someone who'd never lost an argument in her life. Jim arrived alone, carrying a single folder and wearing a simple gray suit. The contrast was striking. Karen looked like she was ready for corporate warfare, while Jim looked like a man who simply wanted justice. Judge Moore called the session to order, and Karen immediately launched into her presentation. She went on and on about community standards, property values, and the importance of maintaining neighborhood aesthetics. She waved dismissively at Jim's evidence and talked over the judge twice, never a good sign. Then it was Jim's turn. He stood up calmly and handed copies of the forged documents to the judge and court clerk. Then he presented the original versions he'd actually received, unsigned. He laid out a clear timeline, pointed to discrepancies, and submitted the certified handwriting analysis. You could have heard a pin drop in that courtroom. Judge Moore's expression went from professional interest to stone cold fury as she examined each piece of evidence. "Ms. Whitmore," the judge said finally, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade. "Did Mr. Bennett sign this document in your presence?" Karen blinked hard, clearly caught off guard. "Of course he did. You're under oath, Ms. Whitmore." There was a long pause. Karen's confident facade began to crack. "Well," he said he would. "He gave me permission." "Permission is not a signature," Judge Moore snapped. The judge then called Jim's handwriting expert to testify. Using visual aids and overlays, the expert methodically demonstrated how the signature was clearly traced and completely inconsistent with Jim's natural handwriting patterns. The evidence was so overwhelming it was almost embarrassing. Karen's face lost all color. She started to speak, but Judge Moore held up her hand. "This court has zero tolerance for document forgery," the judge said, "especially not in legal filings submitted to a court of law." Judge Moore called for a recess, but before the gavel hit the block, she added something that made everyone's blood freeze. "Miss Whitmore, do not leave the courthouse." During the recess, Jim revealed something that made the situation even worse. While reviewing all his HOA documents, he discovered 3 more forged signatures on various forms Karen had submitted over the past year. This wasn't a one-time mistake, it was a pattern of fraud. When court resumed, the atmosphere was electric with tension. Karen was escorted back to her seat, but she wouldn't look at anyone. She just stared straight ahead like she was trying to will herself somewhere else. Judge Moore's voice was firm and measured when she delivered her verdict. "This court finds substantial evidence of willful falsification of legal documents. Ms. Whitmore, not only did you submit forged material to this court, but you did so under the pretense of legal authority." Karen tried to interrupt, but the judge cut her off. "This matter exceeds civil dispute. You are hereby remanded to county custody pending formal charges for fraud, forgery, and obstruction of justice." Gasps echoed throughout the courtroom. Karen's mouth fell open in shock. "Wait, this is a misunderstanding?" she started to say. But the bailiff was already moving. "Ma'am, please place your hands behind your back." Karen stood frozen for what felt like an eternity, then slowly complied. The sound of handcuffs clicking shut was the only noise in that silent courtroom. Her designer handbag slipped from her arm and hit the floor, with a soft thud that seemed to echo forever. Karen Whitmore, the woman who once fined a neighbor for having their newspaper delivered 15 minutes too early, was being led away in handcuffs. The news spread through Willow Creek faster than gossip at a church potluck. Smartphones lit up with messages. Group chats exploded with speculation, and front yards buzzed with conversations that had been years in the making. Some residents were shocked. Others quietly celebrated. But everyone agreed on one thing. They'd never seen anything like it. The county prosecutor confirmed that Karen would be formally charged within 48 hours. Her actions hadn't just jeopardized her own legal standing, they'd thrown the entire credibility of the HOA into question. But the story doesn't end there. In the weeks following Karen's arrest, the HOA brought in a third-party auditor to review every single document she'd handled during her tenure. What they found was even worse than anyone imagined. Karen had forged signatures in 4 other cases, targeting homeowners who dared to question her authority. She'd filed unauthorized liens, levied unlawful fines, and even altered meeting minutes to fabricate votes that never happened. The HOA that residents had feared under her rule had unknowingly become a weapon in her personal power trip. The county DA's office filed multiple felony charges, 4 counts of forgery, 2 counts of fraud, 1 count of perjury, and 1 count of obstruction of justice. Her bail was denied due to the extensive pattern of document manipulation. The arrest also sparked conversations about HOA governance throughout the county. Other neighborhoods began examining their own boards and processes. News outlets picked up the story, dubbing Karen the tyrant of the cul-de-sac. She became a cautionary tale about what happens when petty authority goes completely unchecked. As for Jim, his quiet act of resistance earned him unexpected respect throughout the community. Neighbors who'd once kept their distance now waved from their porches and stopped to chat about his garden. He was invited to serve as legal advisor on the newly restructured HOA board, though he politely declined. "I prefer tomatoes to politics," he said with a chuckle during a neighborhood barbecue held right on his front lawn. And that garden? It flourished beyond anyone's expectations. Inspired by Jim's resilience, several other families began planting their own vegetables. Willow Creek's once uniform lawns suddenly bloomed with peppers, squash herbs, and raised flower beds. The rigid monotony Karen had so zealously enforced gave way to personality, color, and genuine community spirit. At Karen's trial months later, she pleaded not guilty to all charges. But with irrefutable forensic evidence and testimony from multiple residents, the verdict was swift, guilty on all counts. She was sentenced to 18 months in state prison plus 5 years probation. She also faced civil suits from every homeowner she'd targeted. But for Jim, it was never about revenge. It was about principle. Because in Willow Creek, justice didn't come from intimidation, fines, or forged signatures. It came from standing your ground, even if that ground happened to be a vegetable garden. The last time I drove through Willow Creek, I made sure to pass by Jim's house. His tomatoes were beautiful that summer, growing tall and proud in defiance of every rule Karen Whitmore had tried to enforce. And you know what? The neighborhood looked better than it ever had. If you thought this HOA drama was wild, you're not alone. Hit that like button if you think Jim did absolutely the right thing by standing up to Karen's fraud. Leave a comment below. Would you ever trust your HOA again after discovering something like this? And don't forget to subscribe for more real-life legal shocks, neighborhood drama, and courtroom justice every single week. Because this isn't fiction, folks. This is what happens when bullies finally meet their match.